Robert Kirkman is the creator behind the entirety of Invincible's original comic book run and serves as the co-showrunner, writer, and executive producer on the animated series. He sees the show as more of a second draft at an already completed narrative, rather than a strict adaptation. Because of this, there has been quite a few changes made to the story in the series while still remaining a pretty faithful adaptation. Now, there are some of these changes I don't exactly love, but I would say there are far more that are really well done. A great deal of these changes come from Season 4, and a great example of improving from the source material comes from Episode 5. I will be going through that episode chronologically and discussing each time something significant was added or changed, and discussing why I feel overall that Invincible is improving its story through adaptation. The fourth season of Invincible to me is overall the second most solid season of the show thus far, with Season 1 still holding that top spot for me. Following an entertaining, although slightly disappointing, Episode 4 in this season, Episode 5 stands as an incredibly well-paced and well-written part of the series. That's actually what I'll be delving into with this video. While I personally believe that Episode 4 is one of the weaker examples of making creative changes to the source material, I see Episode 5 and the ways that it deviates from the source material as a perfect example of how to improve storytelling through adaptation. One thing I would like to mention before I fully get into this is that it's very rare we see an adaptation of any source material have the original creator of the work so heavily involved. It's really great to see just how much Robert Kirkman still cares about the story of Invincible all these years later. From the jump, the episode adds a small but important discussion between Alan and Eve. If nothing else, it adds more depth to both Alan and Eve's character. We see how Mark having to leave Earth to fight in the war against the Viltrumites is affecting her, and that she's aware how tough and confusing it must be for Mark to not only see his dad again, but in this context. Mark and Nolan's conversation also feels like a massive improvement from the comics. Their dynamic to me is far more interesting in this series, with Nolan having to share in full honesty that Viltrumites' plan was to see if Earth was a suitable breeding ground to save their population. There's recognition from both Mark and Nolan about the horrible implications of this. There's still a dire sense of importance of Mark's necessary role in the fight, but it just feels more fleshed out here. At the end of their conversation, Nolan tells Mark that he wants to talk to Debbie. This deviates from the comics as well, with Nolan initially telling Alan he won't even speak to her because he has no idea what he'd even say to her, and that he just wants to get off Earth as quickly as possible. Then he seemingly changes his mind between panels and then goes to speak with her. Once again, there's a lot more depth added to this idea of Nolan seeing Debbie again. In the series, he wants to go see her, but it's actually Mark who tells him that it's a bad idea and he seriously needs to consider whether he's apologizing for himself or for her. An inverse of the comics actually happens here as well, with Nolan initially thinking he should go apologize to her and then second guessing it and turning to leave, but Debbie is the one who opens the door to let him in just as he turns to go. I think this plays out much better and in a far more compelling way. It's more in line with Mark's character to be angry at his dad for even thinking about doing this. In the comics, while Mark's not exactly happy with him, it does read more like Mark is defending his decision to stay away and making excuses for Nolan, rather than telling him the blunt reality of the situation. If he goes and speaks to Debbie, he'd better be damn sure that he's doing it for her sake and not his own, because she's worked way too hard to move on from what Omni-Man did to the Earth and their family, to put her through all of it again just by showing up. This leads to a huge contender for one of the best scenes in the series, where Nolan speaks to Debbie. As I mentioned before, Debbie literally and metaphorically speaking leaves the door open for Nolan to come in and talk to her. Don't get me wrong, I love the original comic run of Invincible. I literally ran to buy the 3 huge compendiums of the book after season 1 ended because I just couldn't wait and I knew it was something special. But it is worthy of note that there isn't much to Debbie's character in the comics, especially when compared to her portrayal in the show. Over 4 seasons, they've given her so much depth and complexity and developed her character far beyond her source material counterpart. The comic dedicates 1 page to Nolan and Debbie's reunion, and while that's fine, credit where credit's due to the original writing and the GOAT Ryan Ottley, but the show gives us a far more engaging version of this conversation, especially for Debbie's character. Nolan acknowledges that he might be there for selfish reasons, but he apologizes anyway, explaining why he did what he did and that he committed unspeakable atrocities. He's cut off, though, by Debbie, and what sets her off is that he says he will spend the rest of his life trying to repair what he did. All of his apology is super in line with the growth of Nolan's character we've seen so far, and it is clear to us that he was changed by his time on Earth and that he is working to atone for what he's done. But the show raises the difficult question of how. How could he possibly make up for all the stuff that he's done? While there is no clear answer, it seems certain that regardless of how much he has changed for the better, there is no fixing what he did. There's nothing to repair because what he did didn't break something, it destroyed it. Nolan as a character has not been met with an issue he couldn't solve his entire existence. The Viltrumites are some of the most powerful species in the galaxy, and even in his time on Earth, he was one of the most powerful beings by a large margin. Viltrumites don't have a response to being told no, and Nolan, while breaking free from his Viltrumite ways, still has to learn that. Debbie then crashes out on Nolan for essentially what I just expressed here. He still thinks he can fix everything and put it all back the way it was, but that's impossible. I want to point out specifically the performance by Sandra Oh because the raw emotion and intensity she puts into every line is just outstanding. There isn't any mention of Indressa in the original confrontation from the comics either, and Debbie throws that in his face only for Nolan to make it worse by saying that she meant nothing to him. Debbie obviously would not have liked a single word out of Nolan's mouth, but it certainly doesn't help that Nolan specifically mentions he didn't love a woman from a planet he had a child with her on. While not one-to-one the same situation, Nolan, my guy, you can't see why Debbie, the woman you just did the same thing to and called a pet, might have the slightest disgust with that situation? After this point, it's like every single word he says is just the wrong thing. Debbie here punches Nolan so hard that she rips bloody holes in her knuckles and hurts her hand. I think it's important to note here too that Nolan immediately wants to help her with her injury, and fix it. He even almost says fix again before he trails off. While this scene in the comics gives Nolan the last words with I understand and I'm sorry, the show gives this last word more fittingly to Debbie, telling him that he said what he needs to say and that he can go. You know, just in a far less polite and YouTube-friendly way. This scene is just an overall improvement from the comics, adding so many layers to both of these characters. It has the unfair advantage of being voice acted and animated, but the emotion here is just so much more intense. Moving on, we get an added scene that properly introduces us to the series version of Tech Jacket, showing off their power set and abilities. This was a pretty necessary addition since there is no other series that this character originates from like there was in the comics that you're able to go and read. Now, before I move on, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. Tech Jacket is both gender swapped and aged down from the character in the comics, who is slightly older and male. I'm going to be fully transparent here. I've not read Tech Jacket. I do not have that strong of an opinion on the gender swapping as long as there will be a significant and meaningful reason to have done so, which honestly I feel without getting ahead of myself here there's going to be. I also can sympathize with those who wanted to see their favorite character adapted as is without any significant change from the source material. I'm of the opinion that whatever side of this decision you're on is totally valid, just, don't be an asshole to people who feel differently, and I think we're golden. Anyways, I actually really enjoyed this brief intro scene. She seems to have a very similar demeanor and personality to the Tech Jacket that I'm familiar with from his role in the Invincible comics. I particularly liked the joke of her moderating the applause, and it got a good chuckle out of me.
Stop it! Stop it! I mean, don't totally stop. A little bit is okay. You can clap. Yeah, that feels right.
Then with Alan and the recruitment scene that follows it, there's slight deviations from the comics like Nolan not being there and a good deal of the dialogue. But none of the changes are so dramatic that it takes away from or adds to this scene in any significant way. There's a nice bit of world building detail that is not in the initial recruitment scene that we see in the comics, with no acknowledgement that Omni-Man is outside the window. It's funny, but Omni-Man isn't even in this scene in the show, and he gets more acknowledgement as a villain who caused mass destruction from this Tech Jacket than the one who was recruited by him in person. Anyway, Zoe and her dad's relationship is incredibly charming and sweet. It's refreshing to not get that tired, worn-out old trope of a guardian refusing to let their child join the fight. In the following scene, they adapt pretty faithfully the conversation between Mark and Oliver about why he should stay back on Earth, but once again with some pretty great refinement. For starters, Mark, unlike in the comics, immediately questions why he would even bother making excuses for Nolan to not come see Oliver. A lot of what Oliver says in defense of him tagging along stays primarily the same, but I think one thing that the show adds that makes the case for him coming more compelling is that he says, if you don't win, the Viltrumites will just come here and hurt the people that I love. They need pretty much all the help they can get if they're going to fight this war, no matter the risk, and not bringing Oliver would give them less of a chance to win. This would lead to Earth getting destroyed anyway, and Oliver's death likely just being postponed. There's also more of a feeling of maternal love towards Debbie here because we've seen their relationship develop far more in this series. Whereas in the comics, Oliver doesn't mention Debbie as a reason for him wanting to join the fight at all. This scene to me is one of the best examples of the Robert Kirkman getting a second draft at Invincible thing I mentioned before. He takes what was originally on the page and adapts it to fit an updated, more complex narrative. A quick thing I'll touch on too is the addition of the family dinner scene before Mark and Oliver leave. There's not much to say here other than I think it's just a heartwarming inclusion, and it doesn't take away from the source material in any way, it just kind of enhances it. The show has been pretty solid at that, with most of the small tweaks and added scenes being great ways to either flesh out characters or the world. Another example is the added conversation between Art and Nolan. In the original comics, Art and Nolan disappointingly never reunite, almost to the point where it plays out like a gag. It makes sense, especially with how things played out in the show, that Nolan would reach out to his other closest connection on Earth after Debbie wanted nothing to do with him. Nolan is desperately clinging and reaching out for the life he had before he did all the horrible things on Earth and left. But his actions and the ways in which people feel about them can't just go away. I have to say though, it is nice to see Nolan be able to chat with Art like they are simply old friends reuniting. The looming presence of what Nolan did is inescapable though. When it comes up inevitably, and Nolan apologizes and claims he's trying to make up for it however he can, Art's reaction is pretty interesting. He acknowledges the words, but doesn't really accept this apology at all. It makes total sense given the reprehensible things that Omni-Man did. Saying sorry is simply not enough to atone for what he's done, but it is objectively a good thing that he's trying to make up for it. The last little gut punch for Nolan comes when he tries to connect with Art over making him a new costume, and Art just kind of stands his ground. "I dress heroes, Nolan," is such a devastating line for him to hear, and it's made even worse by the fact that Art was basically anxious and holding his breath the entire time they spoke, worried that he was going to be killed. Fleshing out Art's character like this is a nice touch, and it helps me believe more so than the comic did that Art and Nolan were longtime friends, rather than him just being a suit maker. Another character who I believe to be improving in the show from the comics is Adam Eve. The goodbye scene she shares with Mark just gives her far more characterization than the source material ever did. Now, I hadn't really noticed this when I was reading Invincible the first time because Eve is still a reasonably great and cool character in the comics, but there are really moments throughout the run where she can feel more like a love interest rather than a character. Particularly in the comic counterpart to the next scene from the episode found in issue 71. In the show, they sort of flip Mark and Eve's dynamic from what it is in the comics. Mark is trying to remain hopeful and optimistic in the face of what is the biggest conflict he has ever had to deal with, whereas in the comics, he is dreading the eventual conflict and sorry to Eve that he has to leave at all, since he may never come back. Eve is very reflective of how fast things are changing and that it might not be for the better. She is clearly worried about losing another person she cares about since Rex died and Robot and Monster Girl are trapped in another dimension. She is understandably pessimistic that Mark may not make it back okay. In the comics, she is upset, yes, but she outright refuses to talk to Mark at all about what's happening, and just tells him to hold her till he has to go. There is just more character to Eve in the show here. She isn't just the worried, sad superhero girlfriend. Instead, she's voicing her complicated and upsetting thoughts, but still holding back the fact that she's pregnant because she knows that could selfishly make him stay. She is obviously a superhero herself, and she understands the risk, but she's also human, and doesn't want to lose her boyfriend. There's just more here that helps flesh out an already amazing character in my opinion, so once again, nothing is lost and only more is gained from the comics. Now, this isn't a comparison thing, but I also do want to point out here just how great the score is. When Eve tells Mark not to die, and he assures her that he won't, we hear the emotional, somber music shift to a slightly more hopeful and uplifting tone as Mark smiles at Eve.
Don't die.
I won't.
It is honestly refreshing to see Mark so hopeful and optimistic here, despite what he's about to face. I like this characterization more than his comic counterpart, who in this scene apologizes to Eve for having to deal with any of this, because she's dating him, and tells her that he could most likely die. I think it's far more consistent with Mark's character at this point for him to try to stay positive, even if it's just for Eve's sake. In the next scene, we get a little bit more of a goodbye than what is found in the comics, and I think it's a nice touch. We get to see again just how important the family dynamic is between Mark, Debbie, and Oliver, and just how much they care for one another. Once again, just highlighting that Debbie is a far more important and impactful character in the series. Mark and Eve's extra goodbye is also great, and I love the delivery of Eve's lines here. Not much to say about them, I just think Jillian Jacobs is a fantastic person for this character. I also love the callback to Nolan's line from season 1 where Mark asks how to breathe in space. Oliver asks the same question and Mark repeats almost the same line that Nolan used before the scene switches. I think it's a nice subtle way to do a callback, but also to show that a lot of what Mark knows about being a superhero still does come from his father, despite their strained relationship. Mark and Oliver's arrival on the ship is also changed pretty heavily to match the changes I brought up earlier. Oliver is understandably mad at his father for not even coming to see him on Earth, and is made even angrier when Nolan tells him he has to go home. We see more of Nolan's anger and lack of ability to deal with not getting what he wants. He can't just do whatever he wants and fix everything, and he still needs to learn that. Not just with Debbie, but with everybody. People aren't good or evil, but rather make good or evil choices. If you've made evil choices, becoming a quote-unquote good person means understanding that what you did was wrong and consciously making amends for your actions and still choosing to do good going forward. Nolan's heart seems to be in the right place, but he still is struggling to understand just how to vocalize that. It's only after Oliver leaves that we see what he really meant instead of just yelling at Oliver to go home. He is clearly aware of the negative impact he has had on the people around him and thought that the best way to spare Oliver from that would be to completely avoid him. What Nolan is struggling to understand here is that he is not considering these other people's feelings when he's attempting to make things right. Just like with Debbie, he thinks he alone can just fix the relationship between the two of them, when in reality, it needs to be a mutual desire and effort to do so, which Mark correctly calls him out on here. He also gives Nolan a well-needed reality check, that he's getting a second chance whether he deserves it or not. So behaving in the same way that he did before, just with better intentions, is not going to work. I also think Mark is projecting some of his feelings he has toward his dad here. He mentions that Oliver used to idolize Omni-Man when he was younger, obviously a clear parallel to how Mark idolized his dad. A lot of Mark's anger is on Oliver's behalf, yes, but it is also for himself. It just adds to the complicated relationship between Mark and Nolan that has been far more developed in the show thus far. I also thought the quick little joke from Zoe at the end of the scene was pretty funny.
Is this the right place? Ugh! Holy crap! I mean, hey! You're not gonna kill me, are you?
In yet another series original scene, we see the GDA monitoring the ship Nolan, Mark, and Oliver were on to see if they're actually leaving. Just something extra not found in the comics that I think once again adds to the story without taking anything away. Cecil is another character in a similar situation to Eve that I thought were great in the comics, but the show adds so much more to them to make them really, really great. The added world building that he of course can't fully trust Nolan's intentions anymore, and the whole GDA is basically shitting themselves until he leaves Earth's orbit, is just an understandable and welcome addition. Then we also start to see what I briefly mentioned earlier about the intentional reasoning behind Tech Jacket's gender swap from the comics. It seems clear to me through their shared scenes that they are setting up a possible romance arc between Oliver and Zoe. This, along with Kirkman's desire to add a little bit more diversity to the cast, makes it a worthwhile change if it's executed correctly. Like I said, I am not the most familiar with the character of Tech Jacket outside of the Invincible comics, but from what I know about him, Zoe is doing Zack's character justice so far, at least in personality. There's also a brief added flashback of a date between Nolan and Debbie that I feel I should mention. It adds to Nolan's sadness about how their reunion went down, and he's still clearly very upset and confused, not able to settle with the fact that he can't fix everything so easily. It's just another welcome addition that shows that he really was changed by his time on Earth. Mark correctly notices this when Alan asks why Nolan is so upset. We get a line from Mark that further deviates from the comics, with Mark saying that he doesn't know if there's enough try in the world for him to make up for all the harm he caused. The show is clearly going for a more complex and nuanced redemption arc than the one found in the comics. Granted, the damage that was done by Nolan in the comics seems to be far less severe than what was shown in the series, but I think it's a welcome change that is leading to a more compelling narrative. Looking back at it, it does seem like mostly everyone in the comics forgives Nolan fairly easily. The attack on their ship by the Viltrumites remains mostly unchanged, with Nolan and Oliver being separated and Mark's revelation that Conquest is still alive. One thing I really do hope they add down the line in the show is Mark confronting Cecil about this. I thought this awful decision by Cecil would have been altered in the series to make him look like less of an idiot and still have it make sense how Conquest comes back, but sadly they didn't change it, so Cecil is still an idiot for this. The series allows Oliver to get some solid hits in, more than he was able to in the comics, but to compensate for this, they add a brutal scene of him almost getting his head crushed, so I don't really know if that was a worthwhile trade for him, but I love how the show added to the already sadistic personality of Conquest when they introduced him, and a scene like this shows that. He could likely kill Oliver very quickly and be done with it, but he wants to have some fun first. I also think it's pretty great that we get to see Mark pretty quickly toss away Lucan here. It's a good benchmark for just how far he's come since Season 2, where Lucan was able to hold Mark down with just a finger. I like when we actually see Mark's power increasing rather than just having characters state that he's gotten so-and-so % stronger. Jeffrey Dean Morgan is the perfect Conquest. I really don't think I can hear anyone else in the role now. And to the people that are saying he doesn't sound like he did back in the comics, is this what you were hoping for? Is this more your speed? But anyway, the way he delivers all of these murderous lines with such bite and giddiness is so incredible. He's just so excited to fight and murder people. Also, the delivery on "that was in confidence" line is just golden. It's one of the best deliveries of the episode. Now, last but certainly not least, we get the rematch between Mark and Conquest. They cut out a significant amount of dialogue from their fight on this planet, but I think it just adds to the brutality of their fight. The only sounds we really hear are the bones breaking or grunts from Conquest punching Mark, trying to get him to release his hands. Mark biting off Conquest's thumb was especially brutal as well. He truly is fighting like a violent animal, doing whatever it takes to make sure Conquest stays down this time. Even when Conquest puts a hand through Mark's abdomen, he just keeps holding on. This fight in both the show and comics is a super impactful moment for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it once again showcases just how far Mark has come that he's able to defeat Conquest for the most part on his own. It also highlights why this story and Mark are called Invincible. It's not that he's going to win every fight without being hurt. No, he's going to get brutalized, but it's his will that is invincible, because he will never give up fighting for what he believes in, no matter how badly he loses or gets hurt. He doesn't let go because he knows he has to win to protect the people that he cares about. This next part I struggled to even rewatch to write this video because the voiceover, sound design, and visuals are just downright grotesque. The only sounds we hear are the sloppy sounds of Mark's organs being pulled out of his body while he screams in agony. It is actually so horrible it makes me sick to my stomach. That's awesome. I can't remember the last time something like this got that visceral of a reaction out of me, especially something animated. It's just as brutal, just as vile, and just an incredible love letter to the original comic run. This fight could not have been adapted any better, and I'm so glad that they gave Conquest the brutal send-off that he deserves. Man, it was just so gross. We get another small added scene of Thetis addressing Telia, and I do like this better than his reaction in the comics. Otley's art is phenomenal, but the Thetis we have in the show is a far more stoic and composed leader. The only thing important to him is stopping the Viltrumites while they have the upper hand. So they can't waste any time wondering if Alan, Mark, Nolan, or any of the others survived. All they can do now is hope that they did and regroup. They end the episode with Thetis officially declaring war between the Coalition of Planets and the Viltrum Empire, which I think serves as a good cliffhanger ending for the episode rather than just ending on Mark having taken down Conquest. It sets the scene for the next episode just a bit better. All in all, episode 5 of season 4 is a shining example of how Robert Kirkman has thus far been able to improve on his original comic story by adding and further developing characters and moments within the series. It really isn't common for an original writer to have such a creative impact on the adaptation as well. So to see Kirkman still have such a drive and passion for the Invincible universe is amazing. Even now he's working on the Battle Beast spin-off comics, and so far they're really great. Invincible continues to set the gold standard for comic book adaptations and has been proving that making changes don't have to ruin the source material. They can perfect it. Those are just my thoughts, but I'd love to hear what you think. Do you like the changes the show is making? Do you wish there were things that were kept more directly accurate to the comics? I'd love to hear your thoughts and discuss them in the comments. If you like the video you just watched, the best way to support it would be to drop a like and subscribe for more breakdowns just like this one. If enough people want it, I'd love to discuss other episodes in the series, or even whole seasons at a time, so just let me know. Anyway, that's it, so, later.